Shut up and sit down.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. This week's podcast is another one we recorded at Outdoor Rama. We sat down with Ernie Power, John Eberhart, and Tim Clarke, and we talked with Ernie about his history, hunting, his background, and how he got into saddle hunting, and the progression into from the tree service to engineering job to Tethrd. And then we could kind of go into kind of the technical aspects of some of the testing that they're doing on saddles now, what they're trying to do. A couple things. He says he keeps using a few acronyms, one being ASTM, which is the American Society for Testing and Materials, and TMA, which is the Tree Stand Manufacturers Association. So that's what the standards are for tree stands and what they are tested to at this point, and how there isn't really a standard for saddles, and kind of where we're going with that. We got some tips and tricks in there and some little bit of insight from John Eberhart. It's great to sit down with him. And then Tim Clarke talks a little bit about the teach and train events and kind of the atmosphere and what we can expect from the teach and train events coming up from Tethrd here as the year progresses. They were shooting for 20 cities in 2020, and they're up over 30 now, I believe. So this podcast we recorded before one of the days at the show, so we're just sitting around in a hotel room and just kind of knocked out a quick podcast. And the previous podcast from the Time's Up Outdoors guys, we videoed that one, put that video out for our Patreons. We're working really hard to increase our video production and the things that we're giving out to our Patreons. So that video they've had for a while. I just uploaded that on the YouTube, our YouTube page. So go over there and check that out. And it's a work in progress. You know, we're trying to test out these programs and kind of get better. And we're using our Patreons kind of as a sounding board. They're able to view those videos ahead of time, tell us what we need to change, what they like, what they don't like. And it allows us to get more familiar with the equipment. But that video is up, and I'm going to keep releasing the video podcast as they come out. But they're all going to the Patreons first, and we're rapidly trying to get better and better on that. And so we have our giveaway set for the first quarter, which is the Phantom starter kit. It's Phantom saddle, the tree tether and lineman's belt, as well as the swag pack from Base Map, as well as a 1-year subscription with Base Map, as well as the Jason Zamkowiak's bow hunting tips and tricks course, which is a video series. All of the things that he doesn't put out on his YouTube channel. And if you're not following along with his YouTube channel, there's some great information on there. But the stuff he's putting into this course are all of his kind of like secret, close to the vest things that he's not putting out there. And so that one of our lucky Patreons is gonna win that. We're gonna draw that here the first week of April. So if you want to check that out or you want to get involved with that, you can go on to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Bowhunter Chronicles podcast, and check that out. Or there's links to it on our website. But if not, you know, when you're listening to this and you're taking away something from it, just tell one of your friends. You know, tell somebody, hey, did you hear about what they're trying to do with the saddles? And there's all these saddle companies, and how do you know they're safe? Well, this is what they're working towards, and this is the time frame that's going to take. Or any other podcast that you've listened to and taken something away from. You know, just tell somebody and follow along with us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Those video podcasts are going to be going out each week, basically a week behind the audio podcast. So go over there, and we're going to be doing a lot more review type videos and some of the gear that we've been using, like for example the Phantom versus the Trophy Line versus the Mantis. We got some videos coming up with that, and we're still going to be doing our basically comprehensive climbing stick video, because we've got just about every climbing stick known to man, and just going to do a video kind of outlining each one of the sticks and have them all in one place, so you don't have to watch a million different videos. But all of that stuff is coming as we're feverishly building our studio to have a place where we can have something to be consistent and continue to put out the same quality of videos that we try to put out as far as the audio quality of our podcast. But all this couldn't be, we couldn't do any of this without you guys, the listeners, and then the Patreons who are supporting us. I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you guys. This is a really fun episode, a lot of great information in there. So check it out. I know you guys are going to enjoy it. But thank you so much for listening. Hey everybody, Adam back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. John and I are sitting here at the Hyatt Place for the Outdoorama in Novi. Special guests today, Ernie Power with Tethrd, John Eberhart, and Tim Clarke from Tim's mom.
Stole my line.
is here as well. So wanted to just sit down and kind of talk. We're here working the Tethrd booth for the new Phantom. And as we get into this, Ernie, I don't know, he's maybe the face, he's got the hat, he's got the hair, everybody kind of knows who Ernie is. But we want to get a little bit of backstory. We like to figure out people's hunting styles and kind of how they got to where they're at. So Ernie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and like how you grew up hunting and kind of how it all evolved into where you're at today?
Sure. Well, I guess the thing for me is I didn't grow up in the whitetail woods. I grew up out in the Rocky Mountains, and so for me, hunting was all spot and stalk on foot. That time of deal. You cover a lot of ground. You're shooting across canyons. I never even picked up a bow until I was in my 30s. So then when I moved to Minnesota to go to college and had to start learning how to hunt around there, the whole tree stand idea was completely foreign to me. So I had to learn how to do that. So it's been kind of a learning curve to figure out, the whole difference of being in a tree stand and being so close to animals, and then, kind of progressed into bow hunting. I was a tree trimmer for a long time. When I was a senior in college, a tornado went through and wiped out our school, and there was nowhere to work, and I was thousands of miles from home, and so I didn't really have anything to do. I didn't have anywhere to live. I was living in a camper, and the local tree service was hiring cash under the table to help clean up the city, and I had experience from running a chainsaw in a previous job, and so I said, sure, I got nothing better to do. So I started trimming trees with those guys, and that led into a whole bunch of years of tree trimming. But that's kind of where the saddle thing started for me. Is I spent a ton of time trimming trees and using that type of equipment, and one day my buddy is like, you should just bring that out in the woods. You could get up into any of these trees and hunt out of it. And so at that time, I didn't have any. I still don't know what I'm doing, but then I knew even less. And so I did. I took my work gear, my saddle and my spurs and my ropes that are covered in gas and oil and chainsaw exhaust, and put them on and hiked up into some trees. But at that time, I was still rifle hunting, and most of my stuff was field edges and long distance types of stuff. And I did that for several years, actually, until I found my first commercial saddle. And I was like, oh, man, other people are doing this too? Like, this was before I was on the Saddle Hunter forum or anything else. It just was like, oh, my goodness, other people are doing this, and this is a way better deal. And that's when I started trying to be more obsessed with scent control and some of the other things.
What year is that?
It would have been 98 or so, okay. Somewhere around that range, maybe 2000.
Okay.
Because, the tornado was in 98, so probably around 2000, 2001 is when I started doing hunting out of my work gear, and then it progressed in, and I didn't pick up a commercial saddle. I missed the trophy line thing. I just wasn't paying attention. I don't know. And so the first commercial saddle that I bought was actually a Guido's Web.
Okay.
And it just went from there. So I don't claim to be a good hunter. I've gotten better. I have no choice but to get better because I'm hanging out with guys like John and the hunting public, and I'm hanging out with Dan Infalt, and I'm getting to spend all this time, and you're just hearing the stories, and you're hearing all these strategies, and it's a waterfall of information falling on you, trying to figure out, okay, how did that work again, and what did you do, and every now and then there's something that you just didn't pick. I mean, John was telling a story last year of where he was hunting. He couldn't get in there because it was too noisy. The ground was frozen, the leaves were frozen, but it was too noisy. And so he intentionally went in there in the morning and spooked everything out, and then went back home and went back in and hunted the afternoon because he knew that he had kicked everything out. And that was a technique I'd never heard of before. So, yeah. So like I said, it's been a long progression. We got into the saddle thing through the Saddle Hunter forum. Back then there was a little niche community of people. In fact, Greg, my business partner, I knew him for several years as G2 Outdoors on the forum and had never seen his face. In fact, I didn't. We had already started the foundations of Tethrd for a couple of months before I ever met him face to face.
Jesus.
It was, I met him face to face at a Saddlepalooza, but by then Tethrd was already in the motion. And it's weird because the first time I went to Saddlepalooza, all of these people that I've known forever on the forum, well, now all of a sudden they have faces and names. And it's just like, so much about this person, but at the same time, it's like, okay, now I got to start remembering their real names and who's that guy again and whatever else. And a lot of those guys are still in my phone under their Saddle Hunter name. So most of the guys from back then, it'll say like their Saddle Hunter name and then their real name is how I've got them in my phone so I can get a hold of them. So. But yeah, that's kind of where this all came from. The Greg and I, well, there was actually some other people involved in the beginning, but Greg and I wanted to be able to provide stuff that so many people had to DIY and post, and I had to search here and search there, and even back then, we called it the Saddle Hunter effect, because if you were to go on Amazon and buy something that had been recommended on a Saddle Hunter forum, the recommended, other people who searched for this bought this, and it'd be a bunch of just random stuff that didn't relate to anything except for Saddle Hunters. It'd be like weird little shoulder brackets that people were using to make a ring of steps, and like all these odd things that have no relation to each other, but Amazon had pieced them together from all the Saddle Hunters buying, this, that, and the other on there. So this is cool because now you've got kind of a one-stop shop, and saddle hunting is exploding. It's great. People everywhere are picking it up. You're getting to see more and more of it, and that's bringing more and more innovation and more people to the game, and it's good for everybody.
Right. And so with that tree background, and that's kind of how you got into the saddle or the commercial saddle type side of it, but you have a engineering background, right? So
yeah, so
it's not just, you're not just the tree guy in the...
No, the tree thing was actually kind of a delay in my engineering career. I have a physics degree for a bachelor's degree, and then I have a master's in engineering on top of that. But I went and I did the tree trimming thing out of college because after the school opened up again, I was like, oh, I don't really have anything better to do, so I just went back to the tree service and I worked with them, and I was like, oh, I'll work here a few months, pay up a few bills, and my whole intention was always to move back out west. Well, I just didn't, and I was there, and then I was like, okay, well, I started applying for jobs with my physics degree, and more the jobs that I was applying for, or at least the ones that seemed interesting to me, ended up going to engineering people, and I kind of got tired of that, and so I'm still tree trimming this whole time, and I call up the local university. I'm like, hey, what is it going to take for me to change this physics degree to an engineering degree so that I can get a job? And so I went back to school and did 2.5 years full time to get my master's in engineering degree, and the whole time I'm still trimming trees. In fact, at that point, I had started my own tree service, and I just got comfortable. It was like, I was a foreman on a crew. I had a pretty decent money coming in. Job was easy. I liked being outdoors, and they just never really got out and tried to find that engineering job. And then one day I herniated a disc, and I was like, well, this sucks. I can't really do this, full time anymore. And at that point I was working full time for the utility company as a trimmer, but I was also working another 30, 40 hours a week for myself. And I said, well, let's put this engineering degree to work. And it was awesome. They always say that, things happen for a reason. And that was, being hurt was the motivation for me to use my engineering. And all of a sudden I have a desk job, and like, it's 15 below, and I don't have to bundle up to work outside. And, things got a lot better from that perspective. But, and it opened up a lot of doors, being able to be in that engineering and all of that stuff, provided the background for some of the more technical aspects of what we've been doing. It worked out really well, and it allows me to kind of speak the language with some of the engineers that we work with now. So like the Predator platform, there's actually several engineers that were involved in getting that all together and out the door. And we've got a couple of guys who work on all of our patent stuff. And, it's all part of being able to talk that same language and do the same stuff with those guys that are helping you.
Yeah, to me, that's, I think, one of the things that's kind of remiss in all of this, where there's all this noise online about, oh, this company, blah, 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 and how Tethrd came about. And it's just, there's one saddle company out there that says, well, we've been doing it forever, and where is your testing, and how is everything? You guys are just DIY guys. The background there in running being a foreman on a crew for a tree service and all of the safety and everything that goes into that, with a degree in physics when you're talking about falls and static and, dropping and all of that sort of stuff. It's not like you guys just said, okay, well, we're going to just go right into this. Everything is being done, and you guys are really championing the TMA standards for saddles and saddle hunting and things like that. So how is that process? Because one of the big questions is always safety.
Sure. So anybody who's kind of involved in this and whatever knows that there's not necessarily a specific set of standards for saddle hunting. And so from the very first day, we're like, okay, let's start looking at what's out there. And we pulled specs from the mountain climbing community, and we pulled it from the tree trimming community, and we pulled it from TMA. What a lot of people might not understand about TMA is TMA isn't a spec. It's not. They're an organization that promotes testing, but all of their testing is actually an ASTM spec. So it's a national organization specification that TMA just says, well, if you want to be recognized by us, you've got to pass these testing standards that are actually written by somebody else. So TMA doesn't own a spec. And that it's a little confusing in the wording when you talk to, everything says TMA approved. Well, all that does is say that, yeah, we tested to the specifications they want us to test to, and then they say, okay, yes, you pass these specs. At the end of the day, that's an organization that kind of helps with tree stand manufacturers trying to keep everybody safe, but at the same time, they've got a recommended list of like lawyers and whatever else for liability stuff, and it's kind of a help everybody in the industry just keep being in the industry. At one point there was 30, 40 tree stand companies out there, and now there's 10, and it's because bad stuff happens. And so what's going on right now with the TMA, the TMA spec, if you will, and like I said, it's not TMA. The head people at TMA brought all of the saddle manufacturers together at ATA this year, and they were like, okay, you guys don't have a standard. And as tree stand manufacturers, we went through this, 20 years ago, whatever, and we didn't have standards, and we had problems and whatever else. And our life got way easier once we had a standard, because then we were able to protect ourselves from any kind of damages and lawsuits and stuff like that, because we said, yeah, we have this spec, and we came up with a list of rules and instructions. So he's like, you guys really gotta do this. And he says, I'm not here to tell you what that spec is. He goes, you guys know your product better than anybody else, and you know the ins and outs of it. He says, but here's how I would suggest approaching it. And what they suggested is for us to form a committee, and that has been formed, and there's some little subcommittees inside there, to basically come up with a list of what we think is important, what we think is safe, and testing procedures, verbiage. That, the first thing we had to do is come up with a glossary. What's a bridge? What's a tether? Whatever. So all of this stuff, so that we're all speaking the same language and we're all testing to a spec. And anything from a platform, yes, it's kind of like a tree stand, but because it's often subjected to side load, that's a test that doesn't get put into a normal TMA testing. So you can go and get your platform tested as a tree stand, but that's all straight vertical load. And it doesn't really account for any kind of side pressure stuff that, a platform might see. So anyways, we're going through and we're going to try and write this set of requirements and then test procedures and pass-fail requirements and whatever. And all of that will then be bundled together and submitted to the ASTM committee. And the ASTM committee will go through their edits and rewrites, decide what they like, what they don't, this works, this doesn't, this isn't realistic type of a deal. And it'll be a back and forth handshake between our saddle hunting community and the ASTM community to basically eventually evolve a set of standards that would be ratified by the ASTM, and then it will become an ASTM spec. It won't be a TMA spec. It won't be a saddle hunting spec. It'll be an ASTM spec that saddle hunters can then test to then work their way into a TMA recognition. So it's going to be a very long process. I mean, it's going to be years for that spec to be written. Because there's going to be so much back and forth, and we have a committee that meets every month, and it's like, okay, this month we're going to work on this. But at the end of the day, we can work as hard as we want, excuse me, to get this thing written, and the ASTM guys might say it's all garbage. Start over. So it's going to take a lot of handshake back and forth to do that, but I think it's important because we can only test to so much, and we can only test to the standards that are out there. And so we've gone to a third-party TMA test lab, and we've done a lot of the testing that's there. But it's still, for example, there's a test for a fall arrest harness that's a face-first fall. And it's intended for the guy who falls off the front of his stand and goes forward, but it's also based around the fact that he's connected between his shoulders on the back. And so as he falls forward, that strap on the back of your shoulders pulls you upright, and then you are caught. Well, you try and do that face-first fall in a saddle, and your attachment points are funny and whatever else, and it's even just setting up the test is very difficult, because the first thing that happens when that guy falls is the bridge pulls him, and he spins back facing the tree, and then all these things happen that they weren't the intention of the original test. So it's trying to figure out a set of standards that makes sense. What makes me nervous is you see every day there's another saddle for sale out there. And it's like, yeah, I had my 250-pound buddy sit in it for 6 hours. It's safe. But that doesn't take into account some of the extreme forces and the things that are involved with some of these drop tests and things like that, or it doesn't take into some of the weird angles and positions and whatever else. It's great that people are testing, but I think it needs to go further than, hooking it up to a come along in your backyard.
And along with that, when you're talking about that, any of the tests with a saddle, creating that standard is going to be imperative, because, as we're setting up people at the show, and I can say, the difference in size between John, Tim, and everybody in this room, you're going to keep your tether height and the length of your bridge and how far away from you are from the tree is going to be different.
Sure.
And that's going to change where that swing.
It changes a bunch of things. Some of that can be addressed in your manuals. Instruction manuals need to cover things like, don't put a bunch of slack in your system. So for our particular manual, we've got illustrations of, don't let your carabiner on your bridge get below your waist. As you're climbing and you're moving your tether or whatever, keep that carabiner, waist high or higher. So that automatically is going to limit the amount of, fall should you step off of anything. So you're constantly taking slack out of your system. So that kind of stuff makes a big difference. Because, in order to have a, quote unquote extreme fall in a saddle, you got to really try. Let's say you're climbing up and you all of a sudden you're standing above where your tether is tied to the tree. Well, now you've got that whole drop down to where your knot is and then all the way back down to the end of the thing. And that's just unnecessary if you're paying attention and you're moving your ropes and you're keeping the slack out of your system. Most of the, like in the tree trimming world, everything is, keep the slack out of your system so you don't fall. You might swing, but you don't fall. And that's kind of the way that we really focus on these tree saddles. It's the same thing. You might get a good pucker moment and you might, drop 6-8 inches, but for the most part, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to eat a little tree bark when you hit the tree. And that's where we like to keep those shock loads and those impacts to a minimum by just keeping that slack out of your system.
And so, in the absence of testing and doing your due diligence, and obviously you guys are, with the new saddle, so you've got the Phantom that's coming out, and then we've got John Eberhart here, so we'd be kind of remiss if we didn't say that John's got his own plan and the Eberhart saddle and kind of what's going on with that.
That's in conjunction with Tethrd.
Right. Yeah. So what with this the new Phantom, what so the safety ratings and all of that, because that's one of the odd things, and I've heard you say it at the show a bunch of times, is like, well, this saddle is rated to 300 pounds because...
Yeah, well, so, yeah, our stuff is rated to 300 pounds quite simply because it's the biggest test dummy that the TMA lab has. So we tested with their 300-pound dummy, and I know that it performs with a 300-pound dummy. Could it perform with a bigger dummy? Sure, possibly, maybe, I don't know, but I've never been able to test it. So for me to in all consciousness say, yeah, it's good to this weight rating, I have to keep it to what I had available when we tested.
Right.
And so, and it's, that the dummy that they have at the TMA lab, 300 pounds is a lot of weight. But not only that, it's a solid steel dummy. So when it comes down to a dead stop on any of your ropes or any of your stuff, it doesn't absorb any impact like a human body would. You're going to have muscle tissue and fat and whatever who's going to kind of work as a spring to kind of absorb some of that. That steel dummy doesn't give. And so it's an extreme version of some of the impacts that are done. And it's really violent. The things that the noises and the sounds and the banging when that dummy comes to a dead stop at the end of these ropes. And it's really crazy to see. And the first time I went and watched it, you've got butterflies in your stomach. It's like, what's going to happen? You don't know. And you see it fall and you see it hit the end of that rope and you see, and then you see it's still hanging there and it didn't break anything. You're like, holy cow. It's hard to even believe that it is there just simply because you watch what's all involved, and it's such a violent test.
And so let's talk about the Phantom.
Sure.
The new saddle. It was all the buzz at ATA, won the best in show or the innovative award.
Yep, we got a third place award for best new product launched at ATA. Which, if you think about it, we're in a room full of tree stand manufacturers who don't want us there. And not only did they have to acknowledge that we were there, but they voted and gave us an award. So for a bunch of people who didn't want us there to go so far as to even give us an award for being there, I thought was pretty spectacular.
But so in this saddle, so one thing of being at the show, like Tim has said, we're kind of in an echo chamber, I think, in what we do. So we hear about all the saddles and all the changes and all the things, but to have a social media aged kid, guy, man, woman, whatever, walk by and say, what is that? Even just never seeing a saddle before, say, oh, that's one of those things to hang the stand, or that's a tree climbing thing. is just such an oddity. And then to have the new saddle to try to explain what has changed and what's different to them, it's just mind-boggling, right? To me, because
it is. And you're right. When you get somebody who's paid attention a little bit and knows some of the brands, or maybe has even purchased a saddle from this company or that company, they can come up and they can talk and be like, okay, what's different about this? And but for the new saddle hunter, it's almost like I don't even try. I can't explain what's different. I just haven't tried it on. And it's quite possibly my favorite moment of every experience like that, because you put it on and you get them tied to the tree and it's like, okay, now sit. And that little fear goes in because now they're trusting their rope and they go to sit down, and then it's almost like they're confused and they look and this light goes on because, wait a minute, it's not supposed to be this comfortable. It's not supposed to feel this secure. And they look and then they kind of swing a little bit and they're like, this is awesome. And right then you've got another saddle hunter. You can just watch it happen. And it's my favorite moment of introducing a saddle to anybody is seeing that, and you can watch it in their face. It's awesome. But yeah, I hear it all the time. Well, this is way more comfortable than I thought it was going to be. This doesn't hurt at all, or man, I really have a lot of movement. And even the guys that are like trying to figure out how to position around the tree, and they look a little clumsy and whatever else, but they're like, I think I could get this if I spent a little time on it, and that's just really cool.
So let's talk about the features of the new saddle. What makes this different from your previous product, the Mantis, or any of the other things that are out there?
Sure. So the thing with the Phantom, we've had our Mantis out there, right? And the Mantis is a great saddle. A lot of deer have been killed. A lot of people use it. But if we were to just sit back on our laurels and do nothing, that's not going to help the industry at all. It's not going to help us at all, or whatever. So we sit and we take all the feedback, all the customers and all the, our guys and everybody is like, what would we change and what would you do? And we don't just take the feedback from our products. We listen to what people are saying about other products too. And we're like, okay, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with that? What would you change if we could? Ultimately that's how the Mantis was born, is because there was a whole bunch of people and we were like, what would you change about, the current offering that's out there today if you could? And when the Mantis was being developed, most of the changes that came up in that discussion were already in the Mantis, and we just couldn't talk about it yet. So we tried to make a few different changes, and a lot of them are small changes, but they end up creating a bigger effect. The sum is greater than the parts in the Phantom. It really is. So one of the things that we ended up doing was we changed the shape of the Mantis, or from the Mantis to the Phantom, to create more of a cupping effect. And there's other ways of doing it, and where we did it with a single piece of fabric to create a cup out of a flat sheet is actually one of our IP details on the saddle. But that allows the saddle to cup your body shape a little better, and that does two things. It's a little more comfortable, but it also helps prevent any of the riding up that people have experienced in some saddles. So it keeps the saddle in place. It's really amazing because by adding that shape, we were actually able to shrink the saddle a little bit because it works so well, but it doesn't have to be as big. We actually had 3 sizes originally, and we had our different testers. We gave them all these sizes and whatever else. It was crazy because regardless of body shape, almost unanimously, everybody came back and said they liked the same one. And so we're like, well, why do we need to make multiple sizes if it seems to work for everybody? So that was a big deal. The adjustable bridge that we've got on there, people like to be able to adjust that for a lot of your hip pinch comes from your bridge length. And on some people, if the bridge is really tight, it pulls the sides in, causes some hip pinch. So being able to extend that out helps a lot there. But also being able to suck that bridge down tight for when you're walking, it gets things clean to your body and makes it so that you can get through the woods without having a bunch of stuff hanging out and flopping and whatever. That bridge is actually kind of a cool story, but we tried a bunch of different ways to do it, and things worked, didn't work. They weren't quite perfect. We didn't like how it worked. There's some ways that you can make a bridge similar with a single piece of am steel and tie in some knots, but that ends up locking up really tight when you put weight on it, or it doesn't hold as well because when am steel is subjected to a load, it gets really straight and really slippery. By the way that we built our bridge, we put a core inside of it that gives that am steel kind of a squishy effect. It gives it something to squeeze and grab onto. So that's something that, we don't really talk about all the things that we tried that didn't work. We come out with here's what we did that did work. The comfort channels were a big deal. For me, out of all the things in the Phantom, the comfort channel is my favorite feature because it allows you to force the bridge to be where you want it on the saddle, and that directs the proportion of weight that's held in the top or the bottom of the saddle. So you can really fine-tune. If you want more weight being held in the bottom of the saddle, you can do that. If you want more in the top, you can do that. And you can really force that bridge to be where it needs. That does two things. It directs the pressures where you want them. You can redirect pressure over the course of a hunt if you're starting to get hot spots. And also, because you're able to kind of do that, it ties in with the shape and it keeps that cupping effect so that you're not going to have a saddle ride on you. So that helps a lot. The Lineman Loops are different. The Lineman Loops is kind of a boring, overlooked detail on a saddle for most people, right? It's there, you use it, but on a traditional style saddle, the Lineman Loops were up on the waist belt, and they were a folded over loop that sometimes it was hard to find, sometimes it was hard to hook into, but more than that, when you leaned back into it, all of your weight on your back was across the waist belt, and so it would get uncomfortable while you're hanging your sticks or you're doing a bunch of scouting and climbing and doing things like that. Whereas we changed our Lineman Loops so that it supported you across the entire body of the saddle. So a lot of that pressure gets relieved. And the Lineman Loops are huge. You can run your fist through them. They're stiff. They're easy to clip into. So the Lineman Loop is a boring detail, but on this, it's actually pretty cool.
And so, John Eberhart, I was reading online as we were going through these things. They're saying, like, when Tim posted a picture of everybody that was in the Tethrd booth this weekend, someone said, well, there's John Eberhart, the Michael Jordan of saddle hunting, right? That's who we've got sitting here, and you've got your own. So have you messed around with the Phantom and hunted
absolutely.
from it? And so you still have your own ideas on, is it like your personal preference? I've hunted out of the same style forever, because your saddle, the one that you're developing with Tethrd, is a completely different shape, size, everything is completely different. So can you tell us kind of your take on the different styles of saddles, and then the saddle that you have that you're working on, and what the differences are and why?
And first off, I want to say this. I've written 3 books. I've got a chapter in each book about saddle hunting, and I've been doing it since 1981. And there's been so many times I've wanted this saddle thing to grow exponentially because it's such a monstrous advantage when you're hunting. I mean, I can't underline that big enough. And Trophy Line came out with something, and there was a little spur of activity when Trophy Line came out with theirs. And then when they went away, New Tribe, because they were making some stuff similar for recreational tree climbers, people went to them to make something, but they did no advertising or anything like that to promote it, actually. And then Greg and Ernie came out, and I mean, they have literally blown it up. And they're taking advice from saddle hunters, people that actually hunt from saddles, and they are constantly trying to critique it and make it the best that it can be. And right now on the market, there is no doubt in my mind that Phantom is the best saddle on the market at this moment. Mine is going to be different, or ours, I should say.
That's all right.
It's going to be called the Eberhart Signature
it
Saddle.
does have your name on it.
And it won't be out until probably late July. And I'm not going to talk a lot about it because it's not here. So I'm suggesting people look at the Phantom right now, but mine is going to be a 2-panel system. It's going to be totally different than that. It's going to be a modification of what I've been using since 1981.
And saddles, I mean, not everybody is going to like the same thing. Not everybody uses a saddle all the time. I mean, we've always pushed it. It's just another tool in your toolbox. And there's definitely people who are going to like one style over another. And in our goal to be, the one-stop saddle hunting shop, we want to be able to accommodate that need for all the different types of customers. And so the Eberhart saddle is definitely going to be a different animal than the Phantom. But there's also different styles of hunters and different types of people out there. So in order to kind of accommodate the world, we want to have a world offering.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure.
Because I've been in this industry since 1975. And I've been a sales rep in the industry since 1992. So I go to a lot of shows, SHOT shows, ATA shows every year for 30 years. I have never, ever seen a company that's 18 months old grow as fast as Tethrd has. I mean, they are taking the industry by storm, and it's because of the social media presence, and these guys are reacting to what people want, and I love it. I've been pushing this thing for years, and finally these two guys have grabbed it by the reins, and they're just taking off with it, and it's awesome.
Well, and John, I know you do your seminars, and you do, you've been trying to show and tell everybody saddle hunting, and that's one thing that Tethrd is doing a great job of, as well as creating now these teach and train events. And there's, what did you say, 30?
I think we have 30 cities planned now. We started out, our goal was 20 cities in 2020. But the more, excitement that's been created and the more people that want to get involved, we've been able to pick up a few more cities, and it looks like we've got 30 different events set up for this year. And some of those are trade shows where you can come to the trade show and try some stuff on in the booth and whatever. But others are as simple as, a guy in the neighborhood is setting up in a city park. We're going to cater in lunch. There'll be some prizes. There'll be some surprises. There will be discounts for people who come to these teach and train events and that kind of a deal. But the main point of it is, because you can't really get a saddle in a store, we want to be able to provide places that people can come and try everything out. And that way you can put your hands on it, you can feel it, you can sit in it, you can get that aha moment and do it. And so, yeah, we're up to, I believe, 30 cities for this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if that grows as the spring progresses. And
the reason I say that is because we've got Tim over here, and Tim was doing these last year, and he's a big, so background on you, Tim, you've been saddle hunting now for how many years? 10 years.
This is my last year was my 10th season. I believe it was like 2009 or 10, something like that, when I bought my first trophy line.
So very hipster saddle hunting before it was cool. But you've been doing these events around here in Michigan, for the last couple of years, and you've got all this stuff. So take us through what happens at these events, because when you read on it, the cool thing about these Tethrd teach and train events is, not a saddle hunter, we don't care, hunt from a different kind of saddle, doesn't matter, come check it out and see it. So walk us through kind of the atmosphere and the reactions that you're getting from people.
Yeah, so it's exactly that. It's an opportunity to get together with people that want to learn this stuff. Because, like Ernie said, you can't find this stuff in the stores. You can't go just grab a saddle off a shelf somewhere and go, hey, I think I might try that, right? So it's kind of hard. It's getting easier now because more and more people have them. So a lot of people have a friend that might have something. But it's been really difficult to actually be able to get a realistic critique of the equipment, whether it's one manufacturer or 2 or 3 or 4, when it comes to the saddle itself or climbing sticks or anything like that. So that was where I started doing this stuff, just basically to get people together and kind of just show how you can climb a tree and hang from a saddle safely. And the differences in how people get up a tree is kind of fun to experience. I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody do something that I'm going, I've only heard of that, or I've never heard of it. And then I adopt it into my own climbing style or whatever. And then to be able to spend a day with people, it's just like we do with Saddlepalooza. That was really the flavor that I was trying to capture when I started doing my own things. It was like, that's really cool to hang out for an extended period of time with a bunch of guys, have a really good lunch. So I usually provide a bunch of burgers and hot dogs or brats or something and do a good lunch and hang out, give a chance for guys to really spend some time testing out other people's, climbing methods, testing out different saddles, all that stuff. I think education is a key piece, especially when you're dealing with stuff that you have to be safety-minded with. It's not the same as a tree stand where everybody's hunted out of a tree stand. As you put sticks up a tree and you hang this thing and you set it up, and most people do that once a year, hang all their stands, and then just go use them, right? Everybody's learned how to sit down on a chair, your whole life. Not everybody learned how to hang from a rope, so it's kind of fun to be able to do that. So when I started doing that, Greg and Ernie were awesome. They sent a whole bunch of equipment. When I mentioned what I kind of wanted to do, I reached out to everybody in the industry and said, hey, I'm going to try to do this. I'd like to have as much equipment to show off as I can and kind of do show and tell with all this. Greg and Ernie sent a whole kit of every size of Mantis saddle and some Predator platforms and a bunch of stuff, and they've been all about education and stuff from day one too. So that was really fun, been able to get a lot of people sized up for what they need so they could order the right one and try it for the first time. It's really fun, and you really do. You meet a lot of great people, and that's been probably one of the hidden gems inside of this whole thing. The saddle hunt community really is a pretty cool group of people. There's not many.
I've got something to add to that, because when I first started doing my workshops a few years ago, I always invited people that were saddle hunting, because I always do saddle demos at the end of the first day. I said, bring your stuff and, get in a tree, and I'll critique how you're using your bridge or how high you're hooking your lead or how you're sitting in the seat. I couldn't believe some of the stuff these people brought. I mean, most of them were hunting out of, at the time, trophy line stuff. A couple of them had some kestrels. They had so much crap. I'm looking at these guys with all the stuff they've got on their waists, and the saddles were a lot bigger. They're 4 pounds and deeper seats, and they're just a lot more bulky. And I'm thinking to myself, I obviously didn't say anything to anybody, but I'm like, there isn't a way on God's green earth I would bring that much stuff to go up a tree and hunt out of a saddle.
You don't even bring a phone.
I would never take a phone in the tree. I'm there to hunt and kill something, not to text. But that's
you can't be a saddle hunter. You've got to be able to take selfies in a tree.
But I gotta say, you guys have brought this weight thing and mobility thing and size down, and it's just so compact and simple.
Well, what I like is, so Tim and Ernie are here in the booth in their hunting saddles. So they're with their, what they take with them. And looking at that is kind of like, the evolution of any hunter, right? Is, you start out, even like elk hunting, right? So you start out day one with your pack is full of all this stuff, and you walk 10 miles that day, and you're like, okay, well, I probably don't need this, and I probably don't need that. And so for some is a 20-year, 30-year journey to end up where we're at right now is, getting into the saddle hunting and, spending, the past year doing it. But you still are losing this, okay, I probably don't need that. Or all of the double coverage that you've got. Oh, I don't need 2 flashlights. I don't need this. I don't need that. And so seeing the efficiency in your setups, so you're in your hunting rigs with your stuff, and they've got their lineman's belts are still, girth hitched around the thing. And it's just really interesting to me. So that would be one of the things I would think from like the Saddlepalooza side of it, is to see what the other tips and tricks, you can read about it. You can see it on YouTube. You can, do any of that. But to see it in real life and have somebody explain and show it, like Ernie last night at dinner is saying, I have questions about spurs and how do you I just think of it as climbing a pole, like a pole tree. Well, why couldn't you use the climber or sticks or whatever? And he says, no, I climb any tree with a giant lineman's belt and just go back and forth and back and forth. And so getting that experience and sitting down and talking to the people that have been doing it for a long time. What we've mentioned Saddlepalooza a couple times, and Ernie had said, you're just coming off of the Saddlepalooza from this year, right?
Yeah, it was just it was just last week.
And so what is Saddlepalooza for people who are going, like, they keep saying this, but how would you find it? And
Sure.
Who's there and what's the deal?
So Saddlepalooza, it was born out of, so Greg was also a member in a bunch of hammock forums. And the hammock forum guys started doing these these hangouts, but they do like everybody come and camp for a weekend in your hammocks, and they have a little get-together barbecue party or whatever. And we're like, Greg's like, why don't we do something like that for the saddle community? And at that point, saddle hunting was still kind of the nerdy thing, and like nobody knew about it, and it was 1,000 people on the Saddle Hunter forum. It was not a big thing, and so we set up an event for everybody to kind of come and hang out and show off their gear, because at that point, almost everything that anybody had was homemade. And so we set up a deal. He was stationed there in Savannah at Fort Stewart, and so he got us permission to come and camp on the Fort Stewart property and camp there. But Fort Stewart also is full of wild pigs. And so we set this thing up as a wild pig hunt and a saddle get-together. And, the first year, there was, 20, 30 people that showed up. I didn't actually get to go the first year, and I kicked myself. I mean, basically it boiled down to I didn't buy my plane ticket in time, and then the plane ticket got expensive, and instead I had to sit and watch from the sidelines through the forum. They're sending pictures and all this stuff, and I said, I'm never missing that again. And so the next year I went down and whatever else, but it's truly a agnostic saddle get-together. I don't care what brand or what equipment you use. We don't care any of that. Come out there, have a few beers, try and kill some pigs, and spend the weekend in Georgia in February when, like for me, when I left Minnesota, it was 10 below zero. So coming down to Georgia in February and leaving 10 below is worth it by itself. But it's grown. I mean, we had, I don't know, probably close to 75 guys there this year. This year was awesome. We killed over 20 pigs. Lots of cool demos. In fact, one whole day of Saddlepalooza is set up specifically for a demo day. Everybody bring your stuff. We're going to set up on a whole bunch of trees. We're going to have lunch catered in, and we're going to sit there and do, what's your cool thing that you learned last year? What's your cool thing? And people are doing like these full demos of how they're climbing trees or what new cool thing they built or bought. And that's just the feel that we tried to capture, like Tim said, with the teaching trains. Get a bunch of people out there to kind of show their stuff and show everybody else, and you can learn, and you can, have a cool lunch and hang out, and it's just an excuse for saddle hunters to kind of get to know each other. And what's really gotten to be cool is now we're starting to see some of the same guys at Saddlepalooza 2 and 3 years in a row. So it's kind of like a little reunion. You get down there like, hey, man, I haven't seen you since last year, or, how's your daughter doing, or all these different things that it's really, saddle hunting is a community. And I've seen it so many times where somebody in the community has some hard time, something go on, and the community steps up and fixes it. I've seen things like where a guy bought a bow online and ended up getting the wrong end of a deal and lost all his money, didn't get his bow, and all of a sudden guys are pitching in, and next thing you know, the guy gets a bow from the community to kind of make up for it. It's like, it's a really cool, really great bunch of guys, and to get them all in a campground. I mean, if you think about it, we had 70 guys camping in a campground for 4 days, drinking a bunch of beer, and there wasn't so much as an argument, not a fight, nothing. It's just a bunch of cool guys there, and it was just an awesome, awesome weekend.
So, with the Saddlepalooza, the saddle community, and so you're talking about Georgia, you're talking about all the places that you've been around, and we talked a little bit about at the show, like what's your favorite show, and all the traveling that you've been doing. In the last couple of years, you've hunted Michigan a couple times now, and what's your take on that now? The second time through, the first time you came up and did some demos with John and did a little bit of hunting in his
JV spots, I
Oh,
believe
yeah.
you called them.
It was the training wheel stands, no doubt. Basically, here, I'm going to put you in this tree because I know I'm never going to hunt it, and you can't screw up my season, is how that went.
I didn't even go.
And so then this year you came back for the Public Land Challenge, and so what did Michigan meet your expectations? Or now you're Ernie Power, king of the saddle community, the face, the hat, the hair, being recognized all over, hunting all over the world, and you come back to Michigan. How does it compare to all your other hunts that you did this past year?
It was hard. Mother Nature didn't play very nice with us. For those of you guys that followed the Public Land Challenge, the first couple of days was like, it wasn't rain that you could sit in a stand and kind of muscle through. It was too much. Water was high, and so we lost a couple of days for that. But then we started to really get in, boots on the ground, get some scouting, getting some stuff going, and trying to kind of figure out the area. You come to a new place you've never been to before, and it's kind of like throwing darts at a map. You don't really know where to start. After a couple of days, though, we were starting to figure it out. Other guys on our team that we brought there were starting to see deer. Adrian had a really nice buck underneath his stand, and Ted saw a couple, and so it was like people were seeing deer and starting to get it figured out, and Greg and I got out, and we were starting to get it figured out, and then all of a sudden we had to go. We had another event that we had to get to, and so we had to kind of cut that one short. But I really feel like given a couple of more days, we'd have been able to make something happen because we were starting to get the feel for it. I was surprised. I saw a lot more deer than I thought I was going to. I fully expected to come to Michigan and just hang in a tree for a week and not see a single deer. I mean, that's the horror stories that you hear. But it wasn't like that. I mean, we saw 3 or 4 different bucks over the course of the week. We just weren't able to put something together or get them in range. Other guys had shots. We had, things happen that I feel like we were getting on the edge of it. And had we not had those 2 days of rain, I think maybe we'd have been in a better position. But it wasn't as bad as I thought. I really didn't think that we would see anything, based on all the horror stories, especially when we changed locations. Originally, we were supposed to be in a different part of the state that, had a reputation for having a few more deer, and we got moved into a different spot. I thought, wow, that's the end of it. Yeah, I mean, Michigan has habitat. It's got deer numbers. You still hear the stories of, they don't have as many of the bigger deer, or even the fact that to get big, a deer has to be a lot older. I can shoot a 130-inch 2-year-old in Minnesota all the time. I mean, they're out there. And a 2-year-old here in Michigan doesn't quite get to those kind of numbers. So, yeah, because even, some of the smaller bucks that we saw in talking to people, they're like, yeah, that's probably a 2.5, 3-year-old deer. And I'm like, that thing's nothing. But,
Well, the buck Joe shot was an 8-point. That was a 2-year-old, and that was probably 80 inches.
Yeah.
I'd guess.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there.
So, yeah, it was fun. If I had to sit down and say where would I want to hunt and have a great opportunity at killing a big deer, it probably wouldn't be where we were. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't come hunt Michigan. I'm planning on coming out this spring to do some turkey hunting and possibly this fall for another deer hunt, just because along with everything else, I like the challenge. So it worked out okay.
Yeah, Michigan. Let me interject something here because I'm from Michigan, so is Tim. Michigan has a lot of deer. In fact, in a deer and deer hunting article a few years back, Dan Schmidt, he wrote, probably the number one state to go to kill a deer is Michigan, just due to the numbers. Just don't go there and expect to see a lot of mature bucks.
So, Ernie, it seems like, and maybe again it's the echo chamber, but a lot of the guys that are helping out, and a lot of the names that I'm hearing from on the saddle forums and stuff, it seems like there's a lot of Michigan guys involved in saddle hunting. Is that a more recent thing? And maybe Tim, you're better to answer that. Or like, it just seems like a lot of the names, a lot of the people that I'm seeing, like Michigan, where are the saddle numbers? I mean, you probably see the sales of saddles. Where are they being sold?
Michigan buys a lot of saddles. I mean, there's no doubt there. But I mean, some of it's just a statistics thing. Michigan has a lot of deer hunters. So, you're more likely to have higher numbers of saddles in states that have, Pennsylvania is a big one too. I mean, we saw a lot of stuff into Pennsylvania. But I think some of it also comes from, you've got personalities in Michigan like John who've been pushing saddles forever. Andy May is here. He's a big saddle guy, and, people know him. Now you've got Mark Kenyon using saddles. He's another Michigan guy. So you're starting to see some of that influx, but I think Michigan has a lot of personalities that help push that. So that helps a lot.
And I guess, and I guess you don't have to answer this. I guess it doesn't go into numbers or anything, but where's the furthest that you've sold a saddle to? Like, where's the most obscure place?
Good question.
So we're
Africa? No.
No, furthest would probably be New Zealand.
Okay.
We've sold a few things into New Zealand, maybe a dozen. We surprisingly enough, we get a lot of stuff out of Europe. Finland buys a lot of stuff. So some of those countries in Europe, believe it or not, bow hunting has been illegal, and they are just getting to where bow hunting is starting to be legalized in some of these states or these countries. And because of that, there's really not a tree stand presence there. And so a tree stand is just as foreign to these guys as a saddle. So these guys are doing their research and whatever else, and they're buying saddles to hunt in these European countries. There's been articles written, and there's been some really cool stuff happening over there with bow hunting. That it's just odd, right? I mean, you can hunt with a firearm over there, but you can't bow hunt, which is like just blows my mind in some of these situations. But that's been really cool. But I think the furthest that we've shipped one is New Zealand. I think we have an order in right now for Australia, and I think he paid to expedite the shipping for it too. So it's like, one thing I've learned in people in other countries, they're used to paying like crazy prices to buy American goods and get them to them, and it doesn't even faze them. And I'm like, you're spending more on shipping than you're spending on the product. So, I mean, we get a lot of sales into Canada, but I would say New Zealand, Australia, those are probably the longest ones. But the stories coming out of Europe and some of those countries are cooler in my mind.
Yeah, we've got one of our Patreons who's in Switzerland. So Jacek, what's happening? But he's Polish, and he's been trying to get into archery, but trying to find him a bow over there, and like some of the rules and everything that surrounds that is crazy just to hear.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we can kind of wrap this one up. We got to get going and get to the booth, get everything set up for today's show. We'll let John round it out because he has actually been sitting here the whole time.
I'm just sitting here now. We got John Eberhart, we got Ernie and Tim. I just like listening to all. I'm just another listener today. So.
Can I clarify something? Because
Sure.
Ernie brought up something earlier about a situation of when I was deer hunting that he kind of remembered, which kind of surprised me. But that was in Ohio, and it was a December hunt, and the leaves were really crispy. And when I got down there, I planned on hunting for 5 days, which would be at least 10 sits, mornings and evenings. And it was so noisy that I blew off my morning hunts and only stuck to evenings. But I didn't want to spook deer with my entry because the leaves were so noisy. So I'd get up every morning because I had 3 locations prepped. I'd get up every morning at like 8 and 9 o'clock, and I would walk to my trees, so I would spook all the deer way back. I could hear them going a quarter mile away from me, and that way when I went back in the evening, I was at a destination feeding location. They would feel more comfortable coming back as opposed to me spooking them with my evening entry. I knew they wouldn't come back. So that I just want to clarify that.
So did you end up killing a nice buck?
No, I passed up about 110 incher. The year before I killed 140 incher.
Oh, well, that's one of the things also is like we're sitting here with, we've talked with Tim on the podcast. Tim says, I don't shoot anything less than 100 inches in Michigan. Like he wants book bucks and, he's targeting Pope and Young. John's in the same boat, and Ernie's hunting all these places where the opportunities are there. Ernie, we were telling Ernie a story about the deer that I should have killed in Idaho, at least by John's account, and he says, just kill him. But the amount of hunting knowledge really that's sitting right here, and the guys that are involved, and the amount of saddle hunting time. Ernie was talking to us prior to the podcast about people coming up and noticing all of the hunts that he's got, and the more you're out there, the more your face is out there online, the more things that you put out, people are paying attention. But these guys are really, there's a ton of knowledge, and they're all approachable, great people to have as a resource just to reach out to if you've got any questions. And I just want to thank you guys so much for sitting down with us and spending the weekend with us. I mean, it's been awesome.
Oh, it's been great. I mean, you guys have been awesome. It's this is my favorite part of the job. I mean, I like the hunting, but I like getting out and meeting people and seeing and hearing stories and talking and whatever else. And so, I mean, this is fun. I mean, by all means, come say hi.
Thanks for the opportunity.
For sure. And that's all we got for you today. Thanks for listening.
Shut up and sit down.